What you're going to hear tonight is a detailed and dangerous plan called Project 2025.
Breaking news is Trump has nothing to do with Project 2025.
Trump has absolutely distanced himself from Project 2025, likely due to its perceived extremism, but it's not unfair for people to draw a connection between Trump and the plan laid out by the Heritage Foundation. Significant portions of the document were written by Trump's former White House staff. As factcheck.org notes, quote, Carson, who wrote the book's chapter on housing, was the Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Miller, who wrote the chapter on defense, was an acting secretary on the Department of Defense. And Vaught, who directed the Office of Management and Budget, wrote the chapter about the Executive Office of the U.S. President, end quote. The Heritage Foundation has worked very closely with the Trump campaign, even helping select administration members for Trump in 2016 when he won the presidential election, as NBC notes in a July article. Trump even spoke directly at the Heritage Foundation's leadership conference in April of 2022 and directly nodded to their efforts to build out a plan for America under his presidency.
But this is a great group, and they're going to lay the groundwork and detail plans for exactly what our movement will do and what your movement will do when the American people give us a colossal mandate to save America. And that's coming. That's coming.
It's also worth noting that he gave this speech the exact month that the president of the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts, states that they began constructing Project 2025. The final point I want to make about Trump's connection to Project 2025 is to point out one of the points of defense made trying to distance the project from Trump. When asked about the connection between the project and the former president, Stephen Moore, one of the authors of Project 2025, clarifies that, quote, it's not meant to be a blueprint for Donald Trump. It's meant to be a blueprint for a conservative president, end quote. Setting aside how weak of a distinction this is, Stephen Moore saying this is additionally ironic considering that he is one of the many examples of Trump's frequent collaborations with the Heritage Foundation. Stephen Moore is one of the co-authors of Project 2025 and is notably also one of Trump's 2016 campaign advisors. In conclusion, Project 2025 is undeniably not Trump's official formal campaign plan, but it's also undeniably written by people that have frequent and intimate collaborations with him and his administration. So it was and is not unreasonable for those wary of a second Trump term to gesture to Project 2025 as an example of where his second term could lead.
I will not ban fracking. There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
In 2016, Harris sought to represent the most progressive and left-leaning people in her party, and thus argued in favor of things like banning fracking. She has since moderated her position in order to represent a larger number of Americans, which is not a bad thing. Yes, she absolutely changed her positions, but a representative of the United States moderating their positions to align better with the people they represent is not necessarily a bad thing. Crucially, this also needs to be distinguished from the accusation that Harris has blatantly changed her values. In a CNN August interview, Harris states that what I have seen is that we can grow and we can increase a thriving clean energy economy without banning fracking, end quote. Such a statement delineates that she is still pursuing the same goal and value of increasing clean energy, but she no longer supports strict measures to push out other means of energy production. In summary, Kamala Harris has changed her position on fracking from what it was 5 years ago, which is good, but she has not demonstrated any change to her values.
Tim Walz and I are both gun owners. We're not taking anybody's guns away, so stop with the continuous lying about this stuff.
We have to have a buyback program, and I support a mandatory buyback program. It's got to be smart. We got to do it the right way.
This clip is blatantly misleading. While at the 2019 Gun Safety Forum, Harris is asked about her policy for assault weapons specifically, and she says,
what would you do about the millions of, specifically, assault weapons that are already in circulation? What do you do about those?
Well, there are approximately 5 million, to your point, Craig. We have to have a buyback program, and I support a mandatory buyback program. It's got to be smart. We got to do it the right way. But there are 5 million at least, some estimate as many as 10 million. And we're going to have smart public policy that's about taking those off the streets, but doing it in the right way.
The implication of the clip is that Kamala Harris is going to take away everyone's guns, and that's incorrect. You can absolutely oppose Harris doing any sort of buyback, and you can disagree with taking away assault weapons, but that is not nearly the same thing as supporting the total confiscation of, or banning of, all guns in the US. By her own numbers, in this video, Harris is only talking about a buyback program that would affect 1.25 to 2.5% of the guns in America. In summary, Kamala Harris said that she would not take Americans' guns away from them, and that is true whether you look at the more progressive Kamala Harris of 2019 or the more moderated Kamala Harris of 2024.
There was a mob of people carrying tiki torches, spewing anti-Semitic hate. What did the president then at the time say? There were fine people on each side.
I had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally.
I believe that a lot of people do use this quote in a misleading way, but after looking at it, I think how Kamala Harris depicted it here is actually pretty okay. It is absolutely true that Donald Trump explicitly condemned neo-Nazis and white nationalists after the events of the Unite the Right rally. However, it is also true that he did refer to the conflict as there being quote-unquote fine people on both sides. People can and do object to this statement separate from his condemnation of neo-Nazis and white nationalists on the grounds that it implies that the two sides of the conflict were equally culpable. One side was protesting the removal of a statue of Robert E. Lee and was so populated by groups associated with white supremacy that Gavin McInnes, the former leader of the Proud Boys, formally denounced the event because he did not want to be associated with Nazis. The other side was protesters protesting that group. One side had a member that deliberately drove a truck into a group of counter-protesters and killed a woman, and the other didn't. Trump made his statement 3 days after the murder of that woman. In summary, I would love it if Harris, like everyone else, included the full context of that quote and included Trump's condemnation later of the neo-Nazis and white supremacists, but to equate the two groups is fair to criticize by itself, and she did not say anything incorrect.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born.
This argument gets murky, but the one clear fact is that infanticide is illegal federally and in every state. Even the second image shown in this TikTok doesn't show states that allow infanticide, it just shows states that have no ban on abortion after viability, which is very different. The first image is the headline of an article from the Daily Signal, where the author points out that there were cases when babies born after attempted abortions were left to die. This is correct and did happen. The key distinction, as I understand it, is that there are some cases where not medically supporting a baby after birth is considered the most humane option, and this is considered legally and, crucially, morally distinct. Out of the statistics regarding born-alive abortions, many of them are due to congenital defects that would result in a difficult life or early death for the child. Of those that don't have defects, most born before 26 weeks have a very low chance of survival, and an even lower chance of survival without severe impairment. As a result of this, doctors will discuss a plan with the woman who received the abortion about what their best course of action is, and one course is to not attempt further medical action and let the infant pass without further invasive action. In many of these cases, the infant is provided comfort care as well to guarantee that their passing is peaceful. I don't deny that this is a murky area, and it's even still discussed in the medical field because these cases are so rare that it's hard to build out a norm for what the correct course of action is. That said, this is clearly not an instance of Democrats just wanting to kill babies, and the debate moderator was not incorrect in their fact check.
She was big on defund the police. In Minnesota, she...
Right, you get more safety by putting more cops on the street. Well, that's wrong.
This one is so straightforward that it hardly warrants a response, but even if you go off of this tiny clip that's played, it's clear that Harris is not just saying herder defend the police. Here's a slightly longer version of that clip, and I'll let it speak for itself.
For too long, the status quo thinking has been you get more safety by putting more cops on the street. Well, that's wrong. Because, by the way, if you want to look at upper middle class suburban neighborhoods, they don't have that patrol car. They don't have those police walking those streets. But what they do have, they have well-funded schools. What they do have is home ownership, high home ownership rates. What they do have are thriving small businesses. What they do have is access to public health and mental health services.
Donald Trump, the candidate, has said in this election there will be a bloodbath if this and the outcome of this election is not to his liking.
34% of the automobile manufacturing business in our country, think of it, went to Mexico. China now is building a couple of massive plants where they're going to build the cars in Mexico and they think that they're going to sell those cars into the United States with no tax at the border. Let me tell you something to China. If you're listening, President Xi, and you and I are friends, but he understands the way I deal, those big monster car manufacturing plants that you're building in Mexico right now, and you think you're going to get that, you're going to not hire Americans, and you're going to sell the cars to us. Now, we're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars. If I get elected, now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole... That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it.
Even in this clip that this TikTok plays, you can tell that Trump is absolutely not just referring to the automotive industry or the energy industry as he claimed in the debate. After mentioning the 100% tax on cars from Mexico, Trump says, quote, "If I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, that's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it. But they're not going to sell those cars," end quote. This is clearly not referring to cars or energy alone, as evidenced by him starting with that and then saying that's going to be the least of it when it comes to the bloodbath. Now, to be clear, I don't think he's calling for a bloodbath or anything of that sort, but it doesn't help his case when it comes to inflammatory rhetoric, when in the same speech, he's also saying things like this.
If this election isn't won, I'm not sure that you'll ever have another election in this country. Does that make sense? I don't think you're going to have another election in this country. If we don't win this election, I don't think you're going to have another election, or certainly not an election that's meaningful.
What has been happening under Donald Trump's abortion bans? Couples who pray and dream of having a family are being denied IVF treatments. What is happening in our country? Working people...
IVF, which is fertilization. The IVF, I have been a leader that under the Trump administration, your government will pay for, or your insurance company will be mandated to pay for, all costs associated with IVF treatment, fertilization for women.
Besides this just being a stupid thing to say, the claim Harris is making is not that Trump personally opposes IVF, but that Trump's actions that led to abortion bans has opened the doors to states banning IVF, which is true and is happening.